Across the vast expanse of the Galactic Council chamber, 14 distinct species held their breath, or whatever passed for breathing among their kind. The Zalivox delegation, with their imposing 4-meter frames and carapaces that shimmered like oil on water, glared down at the diminutive figure who had just taken a seat at the negotiation table. The chamber, usually filled with the diplomatic murmurs of 100 worlds, had fallen into a silence so complete you could hear the gentle hum of the atmospheric regulators. "They've brought the human," whispered First Minister Greltak to his aide, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in what his species considered a sign of extreme distress. "The one they call Thorne." Thorne Blackwell slouched comfortably in a chair designed for a being twice his size, lazily spinning a simple metal stylus between his fingers. Unlike the other delegates with their ornate ceremonial attire and neural augmentation displays, the human wore what appeared to be the spacefaring equivalent of business casual: dark pants, a rumpled jacket with rolled-up sleeves, and a faded t-shirt bearing the mysterious Earth phrase, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." "Ah, wonderful, the gang's all here," Thorne announced, his voice cutting through the silence with all the subtlety of a supernova in a meditation retreat. "Should we order some snacks? This feels like a snacks kind of meeting." High Commander Zexkal of the Zarvox Empire straightened all 6 of his appendages in outrage. "This is a formal arbitration over the disputed territories of the Cygnus Arm, not some primitive human happy hour." Thorne's grin only widened as he tossed the stylus in the air and caught it with practiced ease. Sure. Just thought some nachos might help with all the tension. I can literally see your blood pressure indicators flashing from here, Commander. Not good for your cardiovascular systems. All 4 of them." Throughout the chamber, officials exchanged knowing glances. Everyone had heard the stories. The Blackwell Protocol, they called it in hushed tones. The reason why, despite being the newest and technologically most primitive species in the Galactic Council, humans had secured more favorable treaty terms in the last decade than races that had been negotiating for millennia. And it always began the same way, with this singular human acting in a manner that seemed completely at odds with the gravity of interstellar diplomacy. "Is this some kind of joke to you?" hissed Ambassador Zilth of the Paxori Collective, her feathered crest rising in agitation. Thorne leaned forward, his expression shifting to something unreadable. "Ambassador, I assure you, I take these proceedings with the utmost seriousness. The question is," he paused, his gaze sweeping the room, "do you all understand what's actually at stake here today?" And that was how it always began. The legend of Thorne Blackwell, the most feared human negotiator in the galaxy, and the real reason why the mighty Zalath Empire trembled whenever humans requested a seat at the diplomatic table. Humans had stumbled onto the galactic stage less than 30 Earth years ago, when a routine mining expedition to Mars uncovered an ancient monitoring post left by the Archivist Guild. First contact had been, by most accounts, a comedy of errors that somehow didn't end in interstellar war, which many species considered a miracle, given humanity's documented history of resolving differences by hitting each other with progressively more sophisticated versions of sticks and stones. In the complex political ecosystem of the galaxy, humans were barely a footnote. Their single inhabited planet, handful of lunar colonies, and rudimentary understanding of gravitic propulsion made them technological infants compared to the Zarvox, whose empire spanned 17 star systems and whose civilization had mastered faster-than-light travel when humans were still figuring out agriculture. Yet here they were, 30 years later, and somehow a single human representative had the high command of the Zarvox, shifting uncomfortably in their ceremonial battle harnesses. The Cygnus territories were claimed by right of first survey by the Empire, droned legal executor Vexmore, his voice modulated to the precise frequency that most species found soothing and authoritative. "We have maintained observation posts in the sector for over 700 cycles." Observation posts, right, Thorne nodded, making a show of consulting his antiquated paper notebook, a deliberate affectation that drove the technologically advanced races to distraction. Would those be the same observation posts that have been mining quantum-resonant crystals from the Hyodine moons at a rate of, let me check my math here, 17 metric tons per cycle? A ripple of discomfort passed through the Zarthian delegation. Behind Thorne, his small team of human assistants remained perfectly silent. Unlike their flamboyant leader, they were models of professional decorum. Lyra Chen, the quantum physicist whose expressionless face concealed one of the most brilliant minds in human space. Malik Ibrahim, the cultural specialist whose photographic memory had memorized the customs and taboos of over 30 alien species, and an Thorne Blackwell, Thorne's younger sibling, whose apparent role seemed to be doing absolutely nothing except occasionally passing notes to his brother. Our extraction activities are within permitted parameters for scientific research, countered Vex Moore, though his secondary voice bladder emitted the slight whistling that Zorbok's biology couldn't suppress when engaging in deception. Fascinating research, Thorne replied cheerfully, especially since those crystals happen to be the primary component in your new line of military-grade shield generators. Very scientific, much research, wow. Several members of the neutral arbitration panel exchanged glances. The Zalvox delegation's carapaces darkened, their species equivalent of a blush. This is outrageous. High Commander Zexkau slammed a clawed appendage onto the table. You have no evidence. Actually, interjected Orion, speaking for the first time as he smoothly slid a data crystal toward the center of the table, we have shipping manifests, refinement logs, and manufacturing allocation reports spanning the last 78 cycles. Oh, and surveillance footage from our primitive drones that your sensor arrays aren't calibrated to detect. The chamber erupted into a chaos of voices and translator units struggling to keep up with multiple languages being shouted simultaneously. Through it all, Thorne Blackwell leaned back in his chair, the hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth as he resumed spinning his stylus between his fingers. And that was just the opening move of what the galaxy had come to fear as the Blackwell Protocol. The first alien species to encounter humans in a negotiation setting had made what they later termed a regrettable underestimation. The Mirtlox Trade Consortium had attempted to secure exclusive mining rights to Jupiter's moons in exchange for what they considered obsolete medical technology, still centuries beyond human capability, but practically ancient by galactic standards. The human negotiator had been Thorne Blackwell, then a mid-level diplomat who'd been chosen mainly because he'd once written a speculative paper on extraterrestrial trade ethics. What followed became the stuff of diplomatic legend. I'm sorry, did I hear that correctly? High Commander Zexel's voice cut through the chamber, bringing the present negotiation back into focus. You're suggesting a joint administration of the Cygnus territories? The mighty Zalvox Empire does not share what is rightfully ours. Thorne stopped spinning his stylus and pointed it directly at the commander. See, there's our fundamental disagreement. It's not rightfully yours. You didn't discover it first, the Paxori did, but you conveniently annexed their survey posts 300 years ago during the Feather Wars. Ambassador Gilth's crest rose in surprise. The Paxori had indeed maintained historical claims to the region, but these had been considered long forgotten after their military defeats centuries earlier. Ancient history, dismissed Vex Moore with a wave of his upper appendages. Is it, though? Thorne scratched his chin thoughtfully, because, according to the Treaty of Mira Prime, which the Empire signed and ratified, territorial claims based on military conquest before the Galactic Accord are subject to review if evidence of prior claim emerges. And guess what just emerged? Orion silently pushed another data crystal forward. This time the neutral arbitration panel picked it up immediately, clearly intrigued. This is absurd, hissed Zexkal. These claims are fabricated. Actually, Lyra Chen spoke for the first time, her quiet voice somehow carrying throughout the chamber. These survey records were recovered from the Archivist Guild's abandoned monitoring post on Mars, the same one that alerted your people to our existence. Apparently, the Archivists were quite thorough in their record-keeping. This was the moment in any negotiation with Thorne Blackwell that species across the galaxy had learned to dread. The moment when the seemingly chaotic, irreverent, unfocused approach suddenly revealed itself to be something else entirely. Let me make sure I understand, interjected Arbitrator Klex, the ancient Virillian whose species' reputation for neutrality had made him the head of the panel. You possess Archivist Guild records that verify a prior Paxori claim to the territories? We do, confirmed Thorne. Records that the Zarvik Empire has been quite deliberately ensuring remained lost to history, which, incidentally, is a Class 3 violation of the archival preservation statutes. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted perceptibly as the arbitration panel began whispering amongst themselves. What had seemed like a straightforward territorial dispute was rapidly evolving into something much more complex. And as the Zarvok's delegation huddled in increasingly agitated discussion, no one noticed Thorne Blackwell passing yet another note to his brother, or the barely perceptible nod Thorne gave in response. The Blackwell Protocol was entering its second phase. What made humans so formidable in negotiations wasn't technology or military might, or even their bizarre biology that allowed them to consume substances toxic to most species as recreational beverages. What made them dangerous was something far more fundamental: their evolutionary history as what the xenobiologists termed persistence predators. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Thorne announced suddenly, his tone conciliatory. We're not here to embarrass the Empire or to resurface ancient territorial disputes. The Zarvok's delegation visibly relaxed at this apparent retreat. We're simply suggesting, continued Thorne, that in light of this complex historical context, a joint administrative approach would benefit all parties. The Empire maintains its extraction operations, the Paxori regain recognition of their historical connection to the region, and humanity gets, well, a modest foothold to establish our own research outpost. This seems unexpectedly reasonable, admitted legal executor Vexmore cautiously. We're reasonable people, Thorne smiled, spreading his hands, just trying to find solutions that work for everyone. For species unaccustomed to human negotiation tactics, this apparent concession might have seemed like weakness or capitulation, but Ambassador Zilf of the Paxori, whose people had dealt with humans more extensively, narrowed her compound eyes suspiciously. What exactly would this modest foothold entail? She asked. Nothing major, Thorne assured them, gesturing for Malik to bring up a holographic display. Just a small research station on one of the outer moons, barely noticeable. See this tiny dot here? That's us. The display showed a comprehensive map of the Cygnus territories, with all existing Zarvox installations highlighted in red and a small blue dot representing the proposed human presence. What would be the purpose of this research station? Asked Arbitrator Klex. Oh, you know humans, Thorne chuckled self-deprecatingly. We're curious about everything. Stellar phenomena, plasma dynamics, quantum resonant crystal formations. High Commander Zexcale's head snapped up. You seek access to the crystal deposits. Well, they are fascinating structures, Thorne replied innocently. From a purely scientific perspective, of course. And what prevents these scientific observations from becoming extraction operations of your own? Demanded Vexmore. An excellent question, Thorne beamed as if the Zarvox had said something particularly clever, which is why we're proposing a mutual oversight arrangement. Your observers at our facility, our observers at yours. Complete transparency. The trap was sprung so expertly that even those who had been watching for it couldn't avoid it. By proposing mutual oversight, Thorne had created a situation where refusing would imply the Zarvox had something to hide, precisely when questions about their activities were already raising concerns with the arbitration panel. This is unexpected, admitted Arbitrator Klex, his ancient features arranged in what passed for surprise among his kind. But potentially a viable compromise. As the arbitration panel began discussing the proposal in earnest, Ambassador Zilf moved closer to Thorne's position, lowering her voice. Clever human. You never wanted the territories at all, did you? Thorne winked at her but said nothing, turning instead to whisper something to Orion, who nodded and began tapping notes into a datapad. The true purpose of the Blackwell Protocol was beginning to emerge. The galaxy had learned, often painfully, that dealing with humans in general and Thorne Blackwell in particular meant confronting a species that approached negotiation unlike any other known intelligence. Where most species sought clear wins based on objective gains, territory, resources, technology, humans played a longer, stranger game. "I have a question," Thorne announced, as the formal drafting of the Joint Administration proposal began. "Since we'll have observers present at the Empire's extraction facilities, we'll need to understand your current operational capacity. For baseline comparison," High Commander Zexcal chittered something to his advisors that the translation system politely declined to render. "That information is classified under Imperial security protocols." "Normally, yes," agreed Thorne reasonably, "but under Section 47, Beta, of the Mutual Oversight Standards, which would govern this arrangement, disclosure of existing operational parameters is required to establish monitoring baselines." Section 47 Beta has a national security exemption clause, countered Vexmore immediately. Thorne snapped his fingers. "It absolutely does, for military applications. But earlier you were quite emphatic that these were scientific research operations. So, which is it? Military or scientific?" The chamber fell silent as everyone present recognized the elegant trap. If the Zulvox claimed military exemption now, they'd be admitting their earlier statements were false. If they maintained the scientific research fiction, they'd have to disclose their operations. "A moment for consultation," requested Zexcal stiffly as the Zarvox delegation pulled into a tight huddle. While they conferred, Thorne leaned back in his chair, making a show of balancing his stylus on one finger. To anyone observing, he appeared completely unconcerned with the outcome, as if this was all just some mildly amusing diversion, rather than a high-stakes negotiation that could reshape the power dynamics of an entire sector. "I've been studying your species," Ambassador Zilt commented quietly from beside him. "You're acting out a cultural pattern, aren't you? This whole performance." Thorne glanced at her, a flicker of genuine respect crossing his features. "What gave it away?" "The stylus," she replied. "It's not a stylus at all. It's a poker chip, isn't it, from your gambling rituals?" For the first time, Thorne's performative facade cracked slightly as genuine surprise registered on his face. Then he laughed, a warm, genuine sound that caused several nearby delegates to jump. "Very good, Ambassador, very good indeed." Before they could continue, the Zarvox delegation broke their huddle. High Commander Zexcal stepped forward, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. "We will accept the human proposal," he announced, each word clearly causing him physical pain, "with certain modifications to the oversight arrangements." "Wonderful," exclaimed Thorne, clapping his hands together once. "Let's hear them." What followed was 3 hours of meticulous negotiation over what appeared to be increasingly arcane details of the oversight mechanism. Most of the neutral observers began to lose interest as the discussion delved into technical specifications for monitoring equipment, rotation schedules for observation teams, and dispute resolution procedures. Throughout it all, Thorne maintained his facade of casual engagement, occasionally making jokes that only his human team seemed to understand, while Lyra, Malik, and Orion handled the technical details with precision. By the time the final agreement was ready for signatures, even the arbitration panel seemed exhausted by the process. Only Arbitrator Klex, with his centuries of experience, watched the proceedings with a calculating gaze, clearly sensing there was more happening than met the eye. "With all parties in agreement," the aged Virillian announced formally, "this arbitration is concluded. The Cygnus territories will be placed under joint administration as specified in the accord, with mutual oversight and recognition of historical claims." As delegates began to file out of the chamber, High Commander Zexcal approached Thorne directly, looming over the much smaller human. "You think you've won something today, human?" he hissed, his translation unit struggling to convey the complex harmonics of threat embedded in his native language. "But the Empire does not forget." Thorne looked up at the massive alien, his expression suddenly devoid of its earlier performative quality. "No, I don't imagine you do. That's rather counting on it, actually." With a final glare, the commander stalked away, his delegation trailing behind him. "Was it worth it?" asked Ambassador Zilth, who had lingered behind. "All of this for a small research outpost on a minor moon?" Thorne tucked his poker chip into his pocket and smiled enigmatically. "Who said that's what we wanted? If not territory or resources," she pressed, genuinely curious, "then what?" "Something far more valuable," Thorne replied as his team gathered their materials. "But I suspect you'll figure it out before most. You're quite perceptive, Ambassador." And with that cryptic comment, the human delegation departed, leaving behind a modified galactic order that wouldn't understand the true purpose of the Blackwell Protocol until it was far too late. One standard galactic month later, Arbitrator Klex received a secure transmission request in his private chambers. The sender identification was encoded in a format he didn't recognize, but something about the pattern tickled his ancient memory. When the connection stabilized, the image of Thorne Blackwell appeared, lounging in what appeared to be a comfortable chair in a location that was decidedly not the small research outpost stipulated in the Cygnus Accord. "Arbitrator, hope I'm not disturbing your evening meditation," Thorne greeted him cheerfully. "Mr. Blackwell," the Virillian acknowledged, his four-fingered hands folding together in the traditional gesture of his people. "I've been expecting your communication, though I confess I don't know why. Just thought you might appreciate knowing what actually happened in that chamber," Thorne replied. "Professional courtesy from one player to another. I recognize that look in your eyes at the end. You knew there was more to it." The ancient Virillian inclined his head slightly. "The question has been intellectually stimulating. Your species secured minimal territorial gain, limited resource access, and committed to expensive oversight operations. Yet you clearly considered it a victory." "That's because territory wasn't the point," Thorne explained, spinning his poker chip on his desk. "Information was." Understanding dawned in the arbitrator's ancient eyes. "The oversight arrangements." "Exactly. Under the mutual oversight protocol we established, we now have the legal right to station human observers within every major Zavod extraction facility in the sector. Observers with diplomatic immunity and secured communication channels." "Espionage," Klex stated without judgment. Thorne made a face. "Such an ugly word. I prefer strategic information gathering. The technical specifications we insisted upon for the monitoring equipment, they happen to be perfect for collecting data on Zorvok's military capabilities, fleet movements, and strategic planning. And the rotation schedule that seemed so important ensures we always have fresh eyes looking at new aspects of their operations," confirmed Thorne. "Within a year, we'll have mapped their entire military-industrial complex." The Virillian was silent for a long moment. "The Empire will realize this, eventually." "Of course they will, but by then the precedent will be established. The protocols will be operating across 17 systems, and most importantly," Thorne leaned forward, his expression serious for once, "we'll have gathered enough intelligence to ensure they can never again use their technological advantage to bully younger species." This was never about humans gaining advantage, Klex realized. It was about creating balance. Thorne shrugged. "Humans have a long history of watching smaller powers get crushed by empires. We've been on both sides of that equation. We've learned a few things about how power works." "And the Paxori? Were they part of your strategy?" "Ask Ambassador Zilth," Thorne suggested with a smile. "I think you'll find she understood the game better than anyone else in that room." As if on cue, a second transmission request chimed on Klex's console. The identification signature bore the distinctive patterns of Paxori encryption. "It seems I'm popular this evening," the ancient Virillian mused. Thorne's eyes twinkled with mischief. "You might want to take that call. I have a feeling it's going to be interesting." With a nod, the human's image disappeared, replaced moments later by the feathered crest and compound eyes of Ambassador Zilth. "Arbitrator Klex," she greeted formally. "I trust I find you well?" "Better informed by the moment," he replied dryly. "I've just been speaking with our human friend." "Ah," the Paxori's crest rippled in what might have been amusement. Then you understand part of the game, but not all of it. I would welcome your illumination, Ambassador. The Paxori adjusted her ceremonial robes, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. The Zalvox have dominated our people for centuries. We could never challenge them directly. Their technological and military advantage was too great. And now we have something far more powerful than weapons. Ambassador Zilth's compound eyes gleamed. We have evidence of their systematic violations of galactic law, methodically gathered by human observers who are, by the Zalvox's own agreement, legally stationed throughout their territory. Klex's ancient features remained composed, but his inner eyelids blinked rapidly, a sign of surprise in his species. The humans are sharing their intelligence with you. Not just sharing, the information gathering network was a joint initiative from the beginning. Did you really think Thorne Blackwell stumbled upon those ancient archivist records by accident? We provided them. Our peoples have been working together since their first steps into the galactic community. The implications unfolded in the Arbitrator's mind like the petals of a night-blooming flower. The humans gain knowledge and influence beyond their technological means. And we gain leverage against an empire that has oppressed us for generations, Zil finished. Within 2 years, we will have enough documented violations to bring formal charges before the full Galactic Council. The Zalvox Empire will face sanctions, reparations, and possibly even forced technological regression, all from one negotiation about a minor territorial dispute, Klex marveled. That's the true genius of the Blackwell Protocol, Zilth replied. No one ever sees the real game until the final pieces are already in place. After the ambassador's transmission ended, Klex sat in silence, piecing together the full tapestry of what had transpired. The humans, barely spacefaring by galactic standards, had orchestrated a decades-long strategy to systematically undermine one of the oldest and most powerful empires in known space, not through military might or technological superiority, but through psychology, misdirection, and the careful manipulation of diplomatic protocols that older species had taken for granted for millennia. The truly elegant aspect was how they'd turned the Empire's own arrogance into the weapon of its undoing. The Zalvox had been so certain of their superiority, so dismissive of the primitive humans, that they'd never seriously considered them a strategic threat until it was far too late. 3 days later, when Klex attended the quarterly session of the Galactic Council, he paid particular attention to the human representatives. Not just Thorne Blackwell, with his calculated irreverence, but the quieter ones as well. Lyra, Malik, Orion, and a dozen others whose names he'd never bothered to learn. They moved through the diplomatic circles with an air of casual friendliness, exchanging pleasantries, sharing jokes, seemingly oblivious to the gravitas of interstellar politics. But now, with new eyes, Klex saw what everyone else missed. How they always positioned themselves near representatives of smaller powers, how they listened more than they spoke, how they built connections and alliances beneath the surface of formal diplomacy. While the Empire focused on grand gestures and displays of strength, humans were rewiring the galaxy's power structures one conversation at a time. And that was the true Blackwell Protocol. The reason why, throughout the galaxy, diplomatic corps now trembled when they heard humans would be at the negotiating table. Not because of their strength or technology or resources, but because of their uncanny ability to see angles no one else had considered, to pursue goals no one else had imagined, and to act out elaborate performances that disguised their true intentions until it was far too late. In diplomatic lounges across 17 systems, a new saying began to circulate. In any room where decisions are made, count the humans. If there's one, you're already too late. The legend of Thorne Blackwell and why the mighty Zalvox Empire feared the one human who sat in every negotiation room had only just begun. 6 cycles later, when the first wave of evidence gathered through the Blackwell Protocol was strategically leaked to the galactic media networks, the Zalvox Empire's diplomatic corps experienced what humans might call a collective heart attack. High Commander Zexcal was summarily recalled to the Imperial homeworld. His political career ended with the same ruthless efficiency that had once been his hallmark. But by then, a new human negotiator had appeared on the galactic stage, Thorne's protégé, a deceptively mild-mannered linguist named Phoenix Zhao, whose approach seemed entirely different from her mentor's flamboyant style. Where Thorne had been brash and provocative, Phoenix was thoughtful and accommodating. Where he had been irreverent, she was respectful of every cultural nicety. It took the diplomatic community precisely 3 standard galactic months to realize they were witnessing another variation of the same underlying strategy. By then, Phoenix had already negotiated seemingly innocuous trade agreements with 7 previously unaligned systems, creating an economic network that neatly circumvented traditional imperial trade routes. When a panicked junior diplomat from the Zalvox foreign ministry was overheard at a reception muttering, "They're everywhere, watching everything, and we never see them coming until it's too late," the Blackwell Protocol achieved what might be considered its ultimate victory, psychological advantage that required no further action to maintain. Humans, as they like to say, were playing the long game, and they were very, very good at it.